The galaxy had always been a place full of wonders, dangers, and countless mysteries. Among the countless stars, planets, and civilizations, there were worlds that everyone knew were nearly impossible to live on. Scientists and explorers often called them death. These planets were not just harsh, they were deadly. Violent storms raged across their skies. The surface was often covered in poisonous gases or acidic rivers, and temperatures swung from extreme heat to freezing cold in hours. The very air could be fatal to anyone unprepared, and even the hardiest creatures struggled to survive there. Most civilizations avoided these worlds entirely, believing them to be uninhabitable. The thought that intelligent beings could thrive on such planets seemed absurd, but then rumors started to reach the Galactic Council, an assembly of leaders from every major star system. Scouts and explorers reported strange sightings, unusual communications, and unexplained events on one particular Deathworld. At first, the reports seemed like exaggerations or misunderstandings. After all, Deathworlds were considered so inhospitable that any form of organized society should be impossible. How could a civilization live, much less fight, on such a world? For weeks, Council members debated whether the reports were credible. Some dismissed them outright, calling them myths or false intelligence. Others insisted that the reports be investigated carefully, warning that ignoring them could be dangerous. Despite the skepticism, the Council finally decided to send an official reconnaissance team to the planet. These were not ordinary explorers, they were the best trained, most experienced specialists the galaxy had to offer. They were equipped with the latest technology, protective suits designed to handle extreme conditions, and advanced scanning equipment capable of detecting even the faintest signs of life. Everyone expected a routine mission, confirm that the planet was lifeless and report back. No one anticipated what they would find. As the team descended onto the planet, their instruments immediately went haywire. The environment was far more extreme than any simulation or prediction. Acidic rain fell in sheets, accompanied by violent winds that threatened to rip their ships apart. Lightning storms danced across the skies in patterns that seemed almost intelligent, and seismic activity made the ground shake unpredictably. Every step outside the protective ships was a gamble with death, yet, somehow, life persisted. The team began to notice signs that someone or something had adapted to this environment in ways that were both shocking and fascinating. They saw structures carved into cliffs and caves that had clearly been designed to withstand the planet's natural hazards. Traps, shelters, and fortifications had been created in perfect harmony with the land, using its dangers as defenses. It became increasingly clear that intelligent beings not only survived on this planet, they had learned to use the planet itself as part of their strategy. This was unlike anything the Council had ever seen. When the reconnaissance team sent their initial reports back to the Council, the leaders were stunned. Video transmissions showed heavily armored figures, moving through deadly storms as if the weather were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. They navigated poisonous swamps with agility that defied logic, and their combat techniques seemed perfectly adapted to the harsh terrain. Every move was precise, efficient, and lethal. The Council watched in disbelief as the images revealed that these beings had transformed a world of death into a world of power. The Council convened an emergency session to review the findings. The normally calm and controlled chambers were filled with tension. Representatives murmured among themselves, exchanging worried glances. Some could hardly believe what they were seeing. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to speak. Every seasoned leader, every military strategist, and every diplomat realized that they were witnessing something unprecedented. For decades they had relied on their knowledge of conventional warfare, their understanding of planets, climates, and human-like tactics. None of that prepared them for this. As the Council members studied the reconnaissance footage, the team continued their work on the planet. They observed the Deathworlders, these incredibly resilient beings, as they moved through the landscape with a combination of speed, intelligence, and survival instinct that was almost frightening. The beings seemed to anticipate natural hazards before they happened, avoiding deadly pitfalls and using storms and seismic activity to their advantage. They were not just surviving, they were thriving. Each encounter with the team reinforced the realization that these beings operated under a completely different set of rules. The Council's previous assumptions about life, survival, and military strategy were suddenly meaningless. Back in the chambers, debates raged. Some Council members were angry, feeling that their authority and understanding of the galaxy were being challenged. Others were scared, realizing that if these Deathworlders could operate so effectively in such extreme conditions, they could easily become a threat to nearby systems. The possibility of interstellar conflict involving these beings seemed almost inevitable. Whispers filled the room about the potential devastation they could cause. Even the most experienced leaders, who had faced countless crises, felt a sense of helplessness. They had never encountered a civilization that turned environmental death into a tool for survival and combat. The reports also mentioned another shocking observation. The Deathworlders' tactics were unpredictable. Unlike conventional armies that relied on formations, technology, and standard strategies, these beings seemed to improvise perfectly with every challenge. Their movements were fluid, almost instinctive, and their decisions in combat were astonishingly clever. Where human or alien forces would panic or retreat in dangerous conditions, the Deathworlders adapted instantly. Their understanding of danger was so advanced that what would kill an ordinary being was used as a weapon against their enemies. As the council watched, some members could not hold back tears, not because of immediate loss, but from the sheer weight of what they were witnessing. For the first time, the leaders of the galaxy realized that their understanding of life and war was limited. The Deathworlders were teaching, in the most terrifying way possible, that survival and strategy could exist beyond their imagination. The tears were a mix of fear, awe, and humility. They had always thought of themselves as the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, but this planet and its inhabitants were a living lesson in adaptability, resilience, and intelligence. Meanwhile, on the Deathworld itself, the beings continued their routines. They hunted, built, trained, and fought in ways perfectly suited to their environment. Each natural hazard, the acid rains, the poisonous gases, the lightning storms, incorporated into their daily lives and, by extension, into their combat strategies. They did not merely endure the planet. They had become part of it, like a single cohesive force capable of surviving anything the universe could throw at them. The reconnaissance team struggled to keep up, noting every observation with both fascination and fear. The footage and reports were sent to the Council in real time, making the impact even more immediate. The Galactic Council had to confront a harsh reality. Their previous assumptions about what was possible in life and warfare had been shattered. They had to rethink everything they knew, from environmental strategy to combat tactics to survival itself. The Deathworlders were not only alive, they were a force that could not be ignored. And for the first time, the Council understood that the galaxy was about to witness a power that had been hidden in plain sight on one of its deadliest planets. The initial disbelief had given way to a mixture of fear, respect, and a profound sense of urgency in the chambers. Debates continued late into the galactic night. Every member knew that ignoring this new civilization could have catastrophic consequences. Orders were given to expand reconnaissance, gather more intelligence, and begin preparing strategies that were radically different from anything previously considered. Scientists were tasked with studying the Deathworlders' biology and adaptation techniques, while military leaders began simulating scenarios where conventional weapons failed completely. The galaxy had entered a new phase, one defined by a species that had conquered death itself, and no one could predict what would happen next. Here, at the start of this unprecedented chapter, the story was clear. Survival on a Deathworld was not just possible, it had become a blueprint for extraordinary power. The Council's tears, their shock, and their sleepless debates were the first signs of a galaxy forced to acknowledge that the rules of existence had changed. In the coming days, weeks, and months, this revelation would ripple across the stars, challenging every notion of life, war, and strategy ever held by the galaxy's most powerful leaders. After the shocking revelations from the reconnaissance team, the Galactic Council struggled to comprehend the full scale of what they were facing. The beings from the Deathworld were no ordinary lifeforms. They did not merely survive in a harsh, deadly environment, they thrived in it. And, more alarmingly, they had turned every danger into a weapon. As the Council studied the footage and reports, it became painfully clear that these Deathworlders had mastered the art of warfare in ways that the galaxy had never seen before. Traditional military tactics, starship formations, and advanced weapons that had dominated countless battles across known space were virtually useless against them. The Council could barely process the implications. The intelligence reports revealed a chilling reality. The Deathworlders used the planet's extreme environment as an integral part of their strategy. Acidic swamps, jagged cliffs, poisonous gases, and violent storms were not just obstacles to overcome, they were tools for survival and offense. A dense, toxic fog that would have suffocated ordinary beings became a cover for ambushes. Lightning storms were manipulated to strike at enemies at precisely the right moment, as if the weather itself was part of their coordinated plan. Every natural hazard became a weapon in the hands of these beings. The more the Council learned, the more impossible the task of combating them seemed. For generations, the galaxy had relied on predictable combat rules. Armies moved in formations, fleets followed tactical patterns, and planets were surveyed and understood thoroughly before engagement. The Deathworlders had no interest in following any of these conventions. Their movements were fluid, unpredictable, and extraordinarily precise. Scouts reported seeing small squads of fighters vanish into acid clouds, only to reappear at a different point with deadly accuracy. Entire fleets were lured into traps that looked like safe passages, only to be ambushed in ways that left even experienced commanders speechless. Every encounter demonstrated an intelligence and adaptability that no training or simulation had prepared the galaxy for. As news of these tactics spread, fear began to permeate the council chambers. Delegates whispered anxiously to one another, questioning the wisdom of having previously dismissed reports of these beings. Some members were openly panicked. The thought that an entire civilization had developed advanced strategies entirely outside known conventions was enough to make even seasoned leaders tremble. The idea that the Deathworlders could extend their influence beyond their planet, into nearby systems became an increasingly real and terrifying possibility. The galaxy, once confident in its technological superiority, was now confronted with a force it could neither predict nor control. The reconnaissance team continued to provide updates. Each report revealed more examples of astonishing ingenuity. The Deathworlders appeared to have an almost instinctive understanding of probability, environmental hazards, and enemy psychology. They anticipated attacks before they occurred, using subtle cues from the landscape, the weather, and the behavior of their opponents. Military analysts were dumbfounded. How could a civilization, supposedly primitive in terms of technology, consistently outmaneuver the most advanced fleets in the galaxy? It was a question that had no easy answer, and it gnawed at the confidence of every council member. One of the most shocking discoveries involved the use of terrain itself as a weapon. A reconnaissance mission had observed a group of Deathworlders in a canyon filled with unstable rock formations. When an enemy fleet approached, the Deathworlders triggered controlled rock slides that crushed vehicles and trapped soldiers. In another instance, they diverted acidic rivers to flood strategic areas, creating barriers that ordinary armies could not cross without suffering devastating losses. Even when conventional weapons were deployed against them, the Deathworlders appeared to adapt in real time, rerouting attacks or using the weapons against their adversaries. The Council watched these scenes in stunned silence, unable to hide their fear. The reports also highlighted the extraordinary resilience of the Deathworlders themselves. Unlike ordinary beings who would be injured or killed in harsh conditions, these fighters moved with a kind of supernatural endurance. They seemed unaffected by toxic gases, acid, and extreme temperatures, moving through hazards that would have instantly incapacitated others. Their physical abilities were extraordinary, but what truly set them apart was their ability to combine instinct, intelligence, and strategy. It was as if every step, every action, every decision had been refined over centuries of surviving the most hostile environment imaginable. The psychological impact on the Council was profound. Some delegates wept openly, not from grief, but from the realization that the galaxy had underestimated a civilization in a way that could have catastrophic consequences. Military leaders argued heatedly over whether to prepare for negotiation, retreat, or a preemptive strike. Scientists insisted that understanding the Deathworlders' biology and environmental adaptations was key to developing any counter-strategy. Civilian representatives were terrified, imagining the devastation that could result if these beings expanded their reach beyond their home planet. For the first time in galactic history, there was a widespread acknowledgement that conventional military knowledge was nearly useless against this threat. Meanwhile, the reconnaissance team reported that the Deathworlders' adaptability extended beyond natural hazards. They seemed capable of learning from each encounter in ways that went far beyond normal intelligence. When attacked with a new weapon, they quickly adjusted tactics, often turning the attack to their advantage. This ability to learn and adapt instantly made them nearly unstoppable. Each engagement became a lesson in improvisation, ingenuity, and ruthless efficiency. The more the Council learned, the more they realized that brute force would not win against these beings. Any attempt at traditional combat was likely to fail catastrophically. Stories of small skirmishes began to reach the Council. In one incident, a small reconnaissance ship was ambushed in a seemingly empty valley. The Deathworlders had used the terrain to mask their positions completely. As the ship approached, vines laced with toxic compounds fell from above, disabling sensors and engines. The crew had no choice but to retreat, barely escaping with their lives. In another case, a fleet attempting to blockade the planet found its supply lines disrupted in ways that defied logic. The Deathworlders had turned simple environmental features, rivers, cliffs, and caves into traps that neutralized advanced technology. The reports made it painfully clear that this was not mere luck. It was deliberate, methodical, and terrifyingly effective by this point. The Council's fear had turned into a mix of awe and desperation. They realized that these beings had fundamentally redefined the rules of survival and combat. Conventional assumptions about tactics, strategy, and intelligence no longer applied. The Deathworlders had taken the universe's deadliest conditions and turned them into the ultimate advantage, a combination of natural mastery and cunning that no other civilization could match. Leaders debated whether the galaxy could even survive an encounter on this scale. The psychological toll on Council members was visible. Even the most experienced diplomats found themselves struggling to maintain composure. The concept of warfare had been rewritten before their eyes. Strategies that had been taught for centuries, simulated endlessly, and executed flawlessly across countless planets, were suddenly meaningless. The Council faced the sobering truth that the Deathworlders' approach was so different that it required a complete rethinking of every tactic, every protocol, and every assumption about life in the galaxy. Despite the fear and uncertainty, the reconnaissance team continued its work, observing the Deathworlders in action. They documented incredible feats of adaptability and intelligence. Small squads would appear and disappear without warning, using the environment to mislead and outmaneuver any opponent. They could anticipate attacks before they happened, turning the galaxy's most advanced fleets into helpless spectators. Every report sent to the council made it painfully clear that the Deathworlders were not only capable of surviving, they were capable of dominating in conditions that would kill almost anyone else. The council was left with a stark realization: the galaxy had underestimated a civilization that had turned death into an advantage. The term Deathworlder no longer just described a species from a harsh planet. It described beings who had mastered survival and combat in ways that challenged every assumption the galaxy had ever made. Their tactics were unlike anything the council had encountered, and the threat they posed was both immediate and profound. Fear, awe, and respect intermingled as the leaders came to terms with the reality that they were facing something entirely new, something that might change the future of the galaxy forever. After receiving the shocking reports about the Deathworlders and their extraordinary tactics, the Galactic Council faced a crisis unlike anything in its long history. The leaders of countless star systems gathered in the Grand Council chambers, the room buzzing with tension, whispers, and a sense of dread. For generations, the Council had prided itself on its ability to maintain peace, order, and security across the galaxy. They had dealt with rebellions, invasions, natural disasters, and even rogue planets. Yet nothing had prepared them for this. The beings from the Deathworld had forced them to confront a terrifying truth. The rules of warfare, survival, and strategy they had relied upon were now obsolete. Debates began almost immediately. Council members argued about the severity of the threat, but very quickly the evidence became impossible to ignore. Video feeds and detailed reports from the reconnaissance team illustrated not just survival, but mastery. The Deathworlders could adapt instantly to any environment or attack, turning natural hazards into weapons, predicting enemy movements, and using tactics that no military manual had ever described. For every question the council asked, the reports seemed to offer a new, more alarming answer. Conventional fleets, advanced starships, and even high-level generals could do little against such adaptability. Fear quickly spread through the chambers, and some members openly admitted that they felt powerless. Military strategists tried to propose plans, but even they struggled to make sense of the situation. They presented simulations of traditional attacks on the Deathworlders, only to see them fail in the most unexpected ways. Starships became trapped in storms, ground troops could not navigate deadly landscapes, and weapons often backfired due to the enemy's clever use of terrain and environment. Every plan that had been successful against previous adversaries crumbled under the unique conditions of the Deathworlders' world. Leaders began to realize that any attempt at conventional combat could result in catastrophic losses. The reality was terrifying. The galaxy's most advanced military forces might be utterly powerless. Meanwhile, civilian representatives on the council grew increasingly worried. They were not trained in strategy or combat, but they understood the consequences of failure. They feared for the survival of ordinary citizens, especially those living on vulnerable planets close to the Deathworld. Panic began to spread in the chambers as discussions turned from abstract strategies to real-world consequences. If the Deathworlders chose to expand their influence beyond their home planet, the devastation could be unimaginable. Entire systems could fall before anyone had the chance to respond. Families, cities, and even whole civilizations could be wiped out. The council had to act quickly, but no one knew how. Some council members began to argue for negotiation. They suggested sending envoys to the Deathworlders, hoping to establish communication and possibly a treaty. But even the advocates of diplomacy admitted that little was known about these beings' motives. Would they welcome dialogue, or would any approach be seen as a weakness to exploit? Military leaders argued the opposite, calling for a preemptive strike. They claimed that if the Deathworlders were truly a threat, waiting could allow them to grow stronger and harder to stop. Yet even these leaders struggled to develop a plan that did not end in disaster. Every strategy, no matter how bold or carefully calculated, faced the same problem. The Deathworlders' adaptability made conventional tactics nearly useless. The council was also forced to confront a disturbing possibility: that the Deathworlders' intelligence and instincts were far beyond what the galaxy had previously encountered. Scouts reported that the beings seemed to anticipate attacks before they occurred. They could move silently through hazardous terrain, avoid detection, and turn natural hazards into deadly traps. In one report, a fleet attempting to blockade a valley was lured into a trap where acidic rivers flooded their landing zones, leaving troops immobilized and vulnerable. In another, a small strike team entered a canyon only to be met with controlled rockslides, forcing a complete retreat. Each incident left the council shaken, not only because of the immediate tactical losses, but because of what it revealed about the Deathworlders' intelligence, foresight, and planning. The psychological impact on the council members was severe. Some became withdrawn, sitting in silence for hours, staring at the screens as if hoping the problem would disappear. Others argued endlessly, unable to agree on a single course of action. The normally orderly chambers descended into chaos, reflecting the unprecedented nature of the threat. Leaders who had faced countless crises found themselves uncertain and anxious, realizing that conventional wisdom and experience were no longer enough. The Council's confidence in its ability to control or influence events in the galaxy had been shattered. In addition to military and political concerns, scientific experts were brought in to study the Deathworlders. They focused on how these beings had adapted to survive extreme environments. Toxic gases, acidic liquids, violent storms, and deadly predators were all part of their daily lives. Scientists concluded that the Deathworlders had evolved or trained in ways that allowed them to use these hazards as advantages. They did not merely endure danger, they thrived on it. Every environmental obstacle became an opportunity, every hazard a weapon. This biological and strategic mastery was unlike anything ever documented in the galaxy, leaving scientists as astounded as the Council members themselves. Reports from reconnaissance teams also revealed the social and organizational structure of the Death. They were highly coordinated and disciplined, yet their coordination did not rely on conventional communication systems. Instead, they seemed to rely on instinct, environmental cues, and an almost intuitive understanding of each other's actions. Observers noted how small units operated with precision, anticipating the movements of their peers and enemies alike. There was no hesitation, no confusion, and no wasted motion. Every action was deliberate and effective. This combination of intelligence, instinct, and environmental mastery made them appear almost unstoppable. As fear and respect grew, the Council attempted to consider defensive measures for nearby systems. Plans were drafted for evacuation, protective shields, and emergency protocols, but all faced the same problem: the Deathworlders' unpredictability. Conventional defenses might delay them, but they could not guarantee safety. In simulations, even the most advanced fleets failed to contain or neutralize their tactics. The Council realized that they would have to rethink every approach to defense, combat, and survival. The old rules no longer applied. The divisions within the Council deepened. Some members demanded aggressive action, insisting that the Deathworlders must be confronted immediately. Others argued for caution, advocating diplomacy and careful observation. Still others called for a complete reassessment of galactic strategy, suggesting that the entire understanding of warfare needed to be rewritten. Meetings stretched for hours, days, and even weeks, with no resolution. Every new report from the reconnaissance team added urgency and complexity, leaving the Council in a state of perpetual tension. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders continued their activities, unaware of the panic they were causing. They moved through their planet's deadly environments with remarkable agility, hunting, defending, and practicing tactics that seemed designed for survival and war simultaneously. Each encounter with outsiders was carefully measured, and their understanding of environmental hazards allowed them to exploit opportunities that no one else could see. Observers could only marvel at their efficiency, wondering how a civilization could adapt so completely to a world that seemed designed to kill everything. The Council was left with a grim reality. The Deathworlders were not merely a threat, they represented a challenge to the galaxy's very understanding of life, intelligence, and warfare. Conventional strategies were useless, standard military formations failed, and even the most advanced technology could not reliably counter their methods. The Council had to confront a truth they could not ignore to survive encounters with the Deathworlders. They would need to abandon long-held beliefs, adapt in ways never imagined, and prepare for a type of warfare that had no precedent. The tension in the Council chambers was palpable. Delegates argued, scientists analyzed, and military leaders simulated. But the core truth remained: the Deathworlders had redefined the rules. Their intelligence, adaptability, and mastery of their environment made them a force unlike any other in the galaxy. Fear, and determination coexisted in the minds of every Council member. As they struggled to find a path forward in a situation that seemed almost impossible to manage, it was clear that the galaxy had entered uncharted territory. The Death approach to warfare and survival had shattered conventional wisdom. The Council faced the difficult task of preparing for a future where old rules no longer applied and new dangers lurked in every corner of space. The fear and respect they felt were matched only by the urgent need to understand, adapt, and survive. The galaxy had been forced to confront a civilization that turned death itself into a weapon, and the Council would never see war or life the same way again. After weeks of tense discussions, emergency meetings, and countless reports, the Galactic Council finally decided that observation alone was no longer enough to truly understand the Deathworlders and their astonishing capabilities. A specialized task force had to be sent directly into the field. This was not just another reconnaissance mission. This was an attempt to witness firsthand the tactics of a civilization that had turned one of the deadliest planets in the galaxy into their personal fortress. The Council knew that the outcome of this mission could determine the fate of entire star systems. Every member of the task force was aware of the danger. These were the galaxy's best scientists, strategists, military experts, and survival specialists, all trained for extreme conditions. Even so, the risks were unlike anything they had faced before. From the moment the task force landed, the planet lived up to its fearsome reputation. Acidic rain fell in sheets, corrosive fog drifted across jagged cliffs, and violent storms cracked the sky with blinding lightning. The ground shook from frequent seismic tremors, and predatory creatures, uniquely adapted to the planet, prowled unseen. Ordinary beings would have been incapacitated within minutes, yet the Deathworlders moved through it as if it were a calm meadow. The task force watched in awe as these beings navigated dangerous terrain with incredible agility. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and almost instinctively strategic. They seemed to anticipate hazards before they appeared, taking advantage of every environmental element to protect themselves or to strike at potential threats. The task force quickly realized that the death tactics were deeply integrated with the planet itself. They didn't just use weapons or technology, they used the land, weather, and even dangerous creatures to their advantage. One striking observation involved a deep canyon where the task force witnessed a small group of Deathworlders luring a team of mechanized drones. As the drones advanced, the Deathworlders triggered a series of natural hazards. Rocks loosened from cliffs crashed down, acidic rivers shifted course to block paths, and poisonous gases spread across the valley. By the time the drones could react, they were completely trapped and disabled. The task force noted every detail, realizing that what seemed like luck was actually precise planning and an intimate understanding of their environment. The intelligence gathered by the task force revealed another startling fact. The Deathworlders had evolved not just physically but mentally to survive and dominate in deadly conditions. Their bodies were resilient against toxins, extreme heat, freezing cold, and crushing pressure. Yet it was their minds that were most remarkable. Observers saw them calculating risks, adjusting tactics on the fly, and coordinating with each other without spoken language. Communication seemed almost telepathic, a combination of subtle signals, gestures, and shared instincts. Every small unit operated as a perfectly synchronized organism, anticipating not only the actions of their peers but also the likely movements of any enemy or intruder. During one engagement, the task force observed a training exercise that was as brutal as it was clever. The Deathworlders intentionally placed themselves in a highly dangerous environment. Poisonous fog, unstable terrain, and acid pools surrounded them. Then they simulated an attack by mechanical drones. The Deathworlders moved with astounding speed and intelligence, using every hazard as a defensive measure and an offensive tool. They maneuvered around toxic clouds to trap drones, manipulated loose boulders to create barriers, and lured the machines into areas where natural hazards caused them to fail. The task force could barely keep up, recording every maneuver with a mix of fear and admiration. It became clear that survival on this planet was inseparable from combat. Each was a training ground for the other. The task force also discovered that the Deathworlders had a unique approach to unpredictability. While they were disciplined and coordinated, they were also masters of improvisation. When faced with unexpected threats, they did not panic. Instead, they analyzed the situation instantly, adapted to it, and used it to their advantage. One simulation by the task force showed a squad of Deathworlders responding to a sudden lightning strike that threatened to destroy their position. Rather than fleeing, they repositioned themselves, using the strike to trap and disable a pursuing drone unit. Their ability to convert random danger into tactical advantage stunned the observers. Every new observation reinforced the realization that the Deathworlders' understanding of strategy was beyond anything previously documented in the galaxy. Reports also highlighted the ability to manipulate not just natural hazards but biological threats. The planet was home to creatures that were lethal even to the hardiest species, yet the Deathworlders incorporated these creatures into their tactical plans. Some predatory animals were guided to chase enemies into traps, while others acted as living warnings, detecting intruders and signaling allies. In essence, the entire ecosystem became a living weapon. The task force could not help but marvel at the integration of life, environment, and strategy. It was not merely survival, it was an entire civilization, molded by death itself. The intelligence gathered was quickly transmitted back to the Council. As the footage reached the chambers, delegates were left in a state of shock. Scenes of Deathworlders using every hazard around them to turn the odds against their enemies left even the most experienced military leaders speechless. Acid pools, electrical storms, and collapsing terrain manipulated with precision showed that the beings had rewritten the rules of combat. Observers understood that conventional strategies would fail. Entire fleets could be rendered useless if they approached recklessly, and even advanced technology was vulnerable when environmental mastery was applied so cleverly. One of the most unsettling realizations was that the Deathworlders did not merely react, they anticipated. Observers reported that these beings could read the likely movements of an intruder, predict attacks, and adapt before a threat fully materialized. In multiple incidents, drones or mechanized units were led into complex traps with multiple layers of hazards. The Deathworlders seemed to understand not just immediate danger but the chain of events that would unfold seconds, minutes, or even hours later. For the task force, it was as if the Deathworlders had a vision of the battlefield that extended far beyond ordinary perception. The biological and environmental mastery of the Deathworlders also included resilience that seemed almost supernatural. Unlike ordinary beings, they could survive multiple hazards simultaneously: poisoned fire, extreme pressure, and toxic chemicals without hesitation or injury. Observers noted that their physiology had adapted over generations to take advantage of every challenge. Their endurance, agility, and mental sharpness were all enhanced by the environment itself. Every hazard strengthened them, rather than harming them. For the first time, the task force understood that the Deathworlders had not just survived a deadly planet, they had become inseparable from it. The planet itself was part of their identity, a partner in strategy and survival. That as the days progressed, the task force compiled detailed reports, noting every technique, every tactic, and every adaptive strategy. The Deathworlders' combination of instinct, intelligence, and environmental mastery made them almost impossible to predict or counter. Their world had shaped them into beings who could exploit every danger for advantage. Every natural disaster, every predator, and every extreme condition was a tool in their hands. The task force realized that any encounter outside their home planet would require entirely new strategies. Conventional weapons, predictable formations, and traditional tactics would fail. The galaxy had never faced a civilization like this before. The Council and the task force understood a sobering truth. To confront the Deathworlders, the galaxy would have to think in ways it never had before. Survival would demand flexibility, creativity, and adaptation on a scale never previously considered. The Deathworlders' tactics were not just clever, they were a complete redefinition of strategy, blending biology, environment, and intelligence into a single unstoppable system. Leaders across the galaxy recognized that failure to adapt could result in catastrophic consequences. The task force's mission had achieved one critical goal: understanding. They now knew the scale, complexity, and brilliance of the Deathworlders' approach, but knowledge came with a heavy price. Every observation was a reminder of the threat these beings posed. Every maneuver witnessed highlighted the difficulty of opposing them. The Deathworlders had taken a world of death and made it their weapon, and the galaxy had no choice but to respect, study, and learn from it. Their tactics were a message as clear as it was terrifying. Survival and victory required mastery of danger itself. The Council's fear had evolved into a mix of respect, humility, and urgency. The Deathworlders had shown that intelligence and survival could not be measured by technology alone. They had turned the galaxy's assumptions about life, combat, and strategy on their head. The task force returned with a wealth of knowledge, but also with a stark warning: the Deathworlders were capable of feats that no conventional army could match, and any miscalculation could have disastrous consequences. The galaxy was entering a new era, one in which the mastery of death itself had become the ultimate weapon. After months of observation, reconnaissance, and careful study, the Galactic Council began to understand the full scale of what they were dealing with. The Deathworlders were no longer a distant curiosity or a potential threat. They had become a central focus of the galaxy's attention, reshaping how every civilization understood life, survival, and warfare. What had started as shock and disbelief had evolved into a complex mix of respect, fear, and urgent determination. The Council realized that the Deathworlders were not only capable of surviving extreme conditions, they had turned survival itself into an art form, one that combined intelligence, instinct, and mastery of the environment. Reports from the task force painted a picture of a civilization unlike any other. Every movement, every tactic, every strategy had been carefully honed to exploit the planet's deadly conditions. The Deathworlders had transformed storms, acid rains, poisonous gases, and dangerous terrain into tools. Their ability to predict and manipulate events made them nearly unstoppable. What had once been perceived as primitive survival was now recognized as advanced strategy. Every natural hazard became part of their combat doctrine, and every battle was a lesson in adaptability. Observers had seen entire fleets lured into traps, mechanical units disabled by environmental hazards, and small squads execute maneuvers that were impossible to anticipate. It was clear that the galaxy had underestimated them in every way. The Council struggled to process the implications. Traditional military knowledge, long considered the foundation of security and power, was suddenly inadequate. Entire fleets could be rendered useless if they engaged without understanding the Deathworlders' methods. Commanders argued endlessly over how to prepare for potential encounters. Some suggested forming new fleets with enhanced environmental awareness. Others insisted on developing strategies that relied less on technology and more on flexibility, improvisation, and intuition. Every idea faced the same challenge. The Deathworlders did not follow predictable patterns. They adapted instantly, learned from mistakes, and incorporated every environmental element into their calculations. The galaxy had never faced an opponent like this. Meanwhile, scientists and biologists continued to study the Deathworlders' physiology. They discovered that these beings had evolved in ways that were astonishingly efficient. Their bodies could endure toxins, extreme temperatures, crushing pressures, and intense physical strain. Their reflexes were rapid, their coordination precise, and their stamina almost limitless. But what set them apart was their intelligence, not just in the conventional sense, but as a combination of instinct, learning, and environmental awareness. They had turned their home planet, once considered uninhabitable, into both a sanctuary and a strategic advantage. The planet itself seemed to be an extension of the Death, and their survival tactics were inseparable from the landscape, the weather, and even the dangerous creatures that lived there. As these discoveries became widely known, the reaction across the galaxy was profound. Leaders who had once been confident in their technological superiority now admitted openly that they had been wrong. Military planners wept quietly in council chambers, not for immediate losses, but because of the overwhelming realization that the galaxy had underestimated a species in a way that could have catastrophic consequences. There was fear, yes, but also a deep respect. The Deathworlders had demonstrated that survival, intelligence, and power could take forms no one had anticipated. They had challenged the very assumptions upon which galactic strategy had been built. The psychological impact of these revelations was immense. Some delegates experienced sleepless nights, haunted by the thought of what might happen if these beings expanded beyond their home planet. Others debated the ethical and political consequences of engaging them in combat. Could the galaxy coexist peacefully with such a powerful species, or was confrontation inevitable? The Council realized that the Deathworlders' actions were a test not only of military strength but of wisdom, humility, and the ability to adapt. Every decision carried weighty consequences. At the same time, stories of the Deathworlders' tactics began to spread throughout the galaxy. Small fleets, explorers, and even civilian vessels that had approached the planet reported encounters that highlighted their ingenuity. A mining ship caught in a lightning storm found itself guided away from danger by subtle environmental cues left by the Deathworlders. An exploration team navigating acid rivers noticed that seemingly random pathways led them safely past hazards, almost as if someone or something was watching over the planet. Everywhere observers went, the Deathworlders' presence was felt, demonstrating mastery over life, death, and the environment in ways that inspired both fear and admiration. Military experts began to reconsider what it meant to train soldiers and fleets. If conventional weapons and strategies were ineffective, new methods would be required. Training programs were redesigned to emphasize adaptability, environmental awareness, improvisation, and rapid decision. Soldiers were taught to think like the Deathworlders, to anticipate danger before it happened, and to turn hazards into advantages rather than liabilities. Simulations included unpredictable storms, chemical hazards, and treacherous terrain, forcing trainees to react to conditions that mimicked the Deathworlders' home planet. Slowly, the galaxy began to adapt its thinking, acknowledging that survival and strategy were no longer about technology alone. They were about intelligence, creativity, and harmony with the environment. The impact on civilian populations was also significant. People across the galaxy began to understand that the universe was far more complex and dangerous than they had imagined. Popular media, educational systems, and even cultural narratives began to change. Stories of the Deathworlders emphasized not just fear, but the incredible adaptability, ingenuity, and intelligence required to thrive in conditions that would destroy ordinary life. Children learned about these beings as examples of resilience and creativity, and scholars debated the philosophical implications of a species capable of mastering death itself. The Deathworlders became symbols of both caution and inspiration. Despite the growing admiration, the Council never lost sight of the danger. The Deathworlders were still unpredictable. Their strength, intelligence, and environmental mastery meant that any miscalculation could be devastating. Emergency protocols were drafted, defense systems were upgraded, and fleets underwent new training regimens. Scientists continued to study the species' biology and environmental adaptation, searching for weaknesses or insights that could help prepare for potential conflicts. Every measure reflected the Council's understanding that the Deathworlders were not just another civilization. They were a force, capable of changing the balance of power across entire systems. One of the most profound lessons from this phase was humility. The galaxy had assumed that its civilizations were advanced, sophisticated, and unchallenged. The Deathworlders proved that intelligence and power could arise in unexpected places, and that assumptions about survival, strategy, and life itself could be dangerously narrow. The Council's tears, initially born of fear, had evolved into tears of awe and respect. These beings had taken a world designed to kill anything that touched it and turned it into a platform for unmatched strategy and survival. The galaxy had underestimated them, and the lesson was clear: underestimating life, no matter how extreme, could have consequences beyond imagination. The Council had begun to implement a new philosophy of preparation and understanding. Fleets were no longer trained solely in conventional tactics. They were encouraged to think flexibly, to observe the environment, and to adapt constantly. Diplomats approached discussions with new respect for intelligence that did not conform to familiar forms. Scientists looked for ways to study life and survival beyond conventional biology. In essence, the Deathworlders had reshaped the galaxy's approach to knowledge, strategy, and power. Their presence forced every civilization to reconsider what it meant to survive, to fight, and to thrive in an unpredictable universe. The Deathworlders themselves continued their existence largely unaware of the galaxy-wide upheaval they had caused. On their planet, they hunted, trained, and moved through their deadly environment with the same mastery as always. Every lightning strike, acid rain, and poisonous fog was integrated seamlessly into their daily lives. Every predator and environmental hazard was a tool to be used, a test to be conquered, and an advantage to be exploited. They had become one with the planet, and the planet had become one with them. For anyone observing from a distance, it was as if the planet itself was alive, guided by the intelligence of its inhabitants. In the end, the Council recognized that survival in the galaxy required more than technology, more than weapons, and more than conventional strategy. It required adaptability, intelligence, and the ability to learn from environments and challenges that seemed impossible. The Deathworlders had shown that the most powerful civilizations were not necessarily those with the most advanced technology, but those who could master life itself in its harshest forms. They had turned death into a tool, danger into opportunity, and adversity into strength. The galaxy would never forget the lesson they had taught. The Council had not only learned about the Deathworlders, they had begun to change because of them. Their tears were no longer only for fear, but for the humility forced upon them by a species that had rewritten the rules of survival and strategy. That galaxy had been shown a new way to understand life, war, and intelligence, and though the future remained uncertain, one truth was undeniable. The Deathworlders had changed the galaxy forever. Every plan, every strategy, and every understanding of survival would now be measured against the brilliance of a civilization that had mastered death itself.